everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the Mental Health Representation in Games panel. We're so excited. Thank you so much for coming. This is an amazing turnout for a Thursday. I'm like, wow. So I thought first we could just go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Meg Eden. I am an author and creative writing instructor. My novel, Post-High School Reality Quest, is about mental health and relations to video games and coping with change. I'm also on the autism spectrum, so I will be bringing that up potentially as well.
Hi, my name is Dr. Kelly Dunlap. I'm a psychologist, a game designer, and the director of mental health research and design at the nonprofit I Thrive Games.
Hi, my name's Tanya. I am a partner variety streamer on Twitch. I'm also one of the Take This ambassadors for 2018, and I also do streaming with Wizards of the Coast on a D&D show that is on Sundays. And I also talk about mental health and other issues on my stream.
Awesome. So to get started, something Kelly and I were initially talking about when talking about this panel was the idea of intentional and unintentional representation. So there's some games where they intentionally go out and they're like, I want to talk about this mental health issue through a character design or an environmental design, while others might have unintentional representation through stereotypes or using social stigmas. So I wondered if we could first talk a little bit about intentional and unintentional representation of mental health in games.
Sure, so I think a lot of people in this room are probably familiar with the game Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. You know, it was a game that was specifically developed with the care of mental health professionals as well as those experts through lived experience around voice hearing and the experience of psychosis. And I guess it's a good point for us to just make sure that everybody in the room knows that this is a panel about mental health and that we'll be talking about mental health topics. And of course, if at any point it becomes uncomfortable, please do feel free to do what you need to feel safe and comfortable, because that's always important. So that, back to Hellblade, that's a really good example of a game that was intentionally designed to not only advocate for a particular kind of mental health issue, it also was very reflective of the symptoms and could give the user just a picture of the experience of what it might be like to, say, hear voices or experience some kind of psychotic episode. So that's a really good example of something that was intentionally designed that way. I think a good example, and one of my favorites on unintentional, is probably Batman Arkham Asylum. Because yes, they intentionally made an asylum, and yes, they intentionally made characters that are quote unquote crazy or insane. But the goal of that is not necessarily to cast light on mental illness in that way. I sincerely doubt that they went out with the intention of that game of making something that stereotypes and stigmatizes and has problematic representations of mental health. They probably just didn't even think about it, especially since that's a universe that's already been created and something that's expected.
One thing I always think about is with Dragon Age 2, there's a couple missions. One where you have to go rescue someone's son, and you get this whole thing about him hearing demons and being possessed. And it turns out, you know, it's not actually that. He's really just got some issues, and you get a choice of whether or not to kill him. And that is an unintentional bad representation. And since you brought up Hellblade, I couldn't think of a intentional one other than Life is Strange with the character that winds up, you know, trigger warning, depending on the choices you make, she winds up killing herself because she, and I'm trying to remember because I only played the game once, but she has some issues after she is drunk at a party or something, and then she's blackmailed about it, and then it just seems like they take that route with her. And if you make bad choices or certain choices, then she winds up killing herself. The other one in Horizon Zero Dawn is, again, you find someone where they ask you to look for a sibling, and it turns out that this is mental health issues, at least the way that I read it as I played it. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was also a bad representation because this guy has been exiled from the group and because he defended himself, but they play it as bad mental health. So those are some examples that I came up with.
Yeah, for me, Life is Strange is another one that I think of intentionally through game design of how the mechanic of going through time and changing your choices and thinking about your choices really invokes the idea of anxiety and really puts you in that place of thinking about everything you're doing and second-guessing everything you're doing. And I think that that's really powerful, and the mechanics can do that for you. And I think with unintentional games that bring up asylums, one that actually I was looking into was The Town of Light, which I initially got very excited about, and I think there are mixed feelings on that.
Yeah.
It's about a woman who returns to an asylum where she was mistreated, and what it does well is it fleshes her out as a human being and a complex character. What it doesn't do well, I think, is it still stigmatizes the idea of mental health facilities.
So Town of Light is really a difficult one for me, and I can't decide. I tried to avoid like good or bad because that's a quagmire that you can't get out of. So the cool thing about Town of Light, like you said, is it does have this fleshing out aspect. It is based on actual historical documents of the asylum in Voltaire in Italy. So it is based on a young woman's account. And so I feel like that is really powerful. I also think it's really powerful to not minimize the horrific way that we treated people with mental health issues in the past. And so that's where I really kind of get torn with Town of Light, is it does not represent mental health treatment in a very positive way, but it also isn't supposed to.
Right.
And so I can definitely, there is some tension around that one. So I wouldn't necessarily say, I wouldn't put it in the same realm as Hellblade, but I definitely don't think it's unintentional. But yeah, that's a tricky one.
So kind of following up with that, what are some components that you think are critical for good representation, and what are maybe some ones that are detrimental?
Ones that are detrimental are where the villains always turn out to have a mental health issue, and that is their kind of reason for them becoming a villain or being a villain, or that they can't accept that they've got a mental health issue, and that's what drives them. Because too many times you play games where someone is a villain because, you know, like there's a queer coding of villains, which I'm sure panels will get into, or there's the queer coding and mental health issues that they kind of combine together. It's like, and this is why this person is evil and terrible. So those are ways that it can be very bad for players, and, you know, like coming across this in a game when you're not ready for it or unprepared, since people don't believe in trigger warnings in games. That's one way in which I think it is detrimental. But if there are games where someone does have a mental illness and it doesn't define their character, is a very good way to be intentional about it, where they're neither good nor bad because of their mental health issues, the narrative actually supports them as a whole person.
Yeah, it's really difficult to find games that take a character in particular and put them in a heroic scene. One of the very few examples I can come up with is Cloud. You know, he has amnesia and he's recovering his memories. Breath of the Wild also does that to some extent too, as Link recovers his memories. So it's not like a direct, you're not going to look in the DSM and see the diagnosis there, but it is definitely hinted at. The other thing I can sometimes find problematic is a lot of times mental illness in a heroic story arc is like, it's the hero's disorder for PTSD. So there's several games where like the surprise twist is, wow, you've had PTSD and you were hallucinating the whole time. Spec Ops: The Line in particular does that. So that can be a real challenge too.
Yeah. I think something you guys brought up that's really important is the idea of humanizing and complexifying your characters. So one example that I think is really great is Night in the Woods. Like you said, there's no DSM label for the characters, but they're so compelling and human and well-rounded and complex that you can resonate with them, and you can speculate on some conditions that they may be struggling with, but it's never labeled, it's never, that's never like a fault or the only defining characteristic, and that's really the reality is mental health. We all have different ways we're relating to our mental health. It's not purely what defines us, and so I found that game very relatable.
Yeah, it's kind of like tokenism in terms of characters. Like, this is the mentally ill character, and that is what they do, and that is their purpose. And you see that in just tons and tons of games. I mean, how many games have like the crazy old man who gives you side quests? I mean, there's plenty of those. Like, think of any RPG. There's always the crazy old hermit. Yeah, so that's definitely, yeah.
Well, and it's lazy writing, honestly. When we fall into these tropes, it's the easy way out. And so making these complex characters is much more compelling of gameplay, and it's much better representation at the same time.
Well, and since you brought up complexity, in this War of Mine, your character actually does have kind of a breakdown, but it's because they're trying to struggle and survive in the middle of a war. And early on in the game, you have to decide whether or not you're going to steal food from this elderly couple. You know, like, and if you do that, and then later on, because you have to make some tough decisions, because the game doesn't like sugarcoat it. You are surviving in war. And I played the game, I played it a couple times, and I had a character just eventually just sit on a box and start rocking because of the decisions they made to survive. So I think that's one of the examples where it's part of the game, but it's a consequence of your actions versus your character has done this, you've done this to this character, so therefore they're evil.
I would just like to point out in this War of Mine that I went into that room with that old couple to steal their bread, and they saw me, and I thought, well, if I just punch them once, then they'll let me go, because I'd gotten into a fight earlier and died because they beat me up. And I'm like, okay, they saw me, I'll just like a quick punch and then I'll run away. And I ended up killing the old woman, and I felt really bad.
You monster.
I know, it was terrible. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with this warm, accepting environment.
Well, no, I did that in Dragon Age Inquisition for science. One time I let the Chargers die. I felt so bad, because I saw like how it affects Bull later, and he's also a fighter. He has to deal with all these issues, and I was like, I can't do this. I reloaded the game, so you are not the only monster on the panel.
Excellent.
Awesome. So we've brought this up a little bit, but I want to give more space for us to gush about the games that do representation well, and for us to kind of dissect a little bit, how do they do it well? Through mechanics, storytelling, world building, character development, et cetera, et cetera.
I probably can't say enough good things about Hellblade. So.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic example.
The thing that, as a clinician, really speaks to me is that they took the time in the development to not just talk to people like myself who are experts in the academic sphere of it, but they took the time to work with people who are experts by lived experience. They had people who had experienced voices and psychotic episodes and were in recovery to come in and share their stories. And then they were able to take what those amazing people had given them and turn them into the world that Senua inhabits. So from the mechanics in the game, from the environments, from the puzzles you have to solve, like they are all reflective of the individual experiences that these people had. And I feel like the game is so much richer for that, because they went to the source material, because they listened to the people who were experts at both ends of that spectrum, and then they did deliver something where the main character was a whole person. Like, she is not her diagnosis, she is not a mental illness, she is a whole person working through something that's really challenging. And you come out of it, you feel for her, you feel with her, and at no point do you ever, I don't think I ever pitied her, which I think is important. Like, I felt bad because she's going through so much, but it was never from a place of like, oh, you poor thing, let me help you. It was more of, I can get through this, we can get through this together. Oh my gosh, that is incredibly creepy and I don't want to go there, but we've got to go through this weird, hellish landscape of hands and faces, like grabbing it. Ew, it was awful. But yeah, I think that's just a great example of going to the source. Yes. And I do understand that not every game developer is going to have those resources. Like, that's, Ninja Theory is a pretty large studio and they could bring those people in. But what I would say is that if you want to make a game and you want it to be about a community that you are not part of, you have to go to the community itself and see what they want, see what their needs are, see what their experiences are, and then you can bring that into your game. And therefore it's not like mental health tourism, because you're not like, oh, this is what depression looks like from my perspective. It's, you go to the source. And even if you do identify as a member of that community, also keeping in mind that mental illness is different for everyone. So I had the number at one point, but for example, when you're diagnosing depression, there's 8 to 10 different symptoms and you have to have 5 of them. So you can literally have people who both have depression that have only 2 overlapping symptoms. And so their experiences are going to be wildly divergent. So being able to capture the depth of that experience, not necessarily that you have to put it into your game, because like if you're making something that is an expression of yourself, completely ignore what I'm saying, because it's your expression, so please do that. But if you're trying to do a game that either is representative of a mental health community, or speaks to an experience, or tries to destigmatize, it's just critically important to talk to people who have lived those experiences to avoid feeling voyeuristic.
Yes, in the creative writing community, we call them sensitivity readers, where you hire people to read your book. You know, you're writing from a community that is or is not your own. You know, like you said, the experience can be quite a range within. I mean, I'm on the autism spectrum. I know people on the spectrum that are completely the opposite of me, but we have very limited shared qualifications or whatever. But with sensitivity readers, it's just so important getting multiple readers from different experiences that can speak on their background and how they connect to the material.
And there are diversity consultants in the game industry as well, for those of you that may make games in the audience. A game for me, and I'm pretty sure it's unintentional, in some ways does it very well, despite that mission I brought up is Dragon Age, because everyone in that game that you interact with is surviving trauma. Hawk has, been forced to leave their home. They lose a sibling. They eventually lose a parent, their other parent. everyone that you've come across has dealt with loss in some way, and they all grow through this. I know a lot of people give the game grief, but to me, it's one of the best written games I've ever played, because it takes place over 3 acts, 10 years in game time, and everyone grows in that time. And they have lives outside of the protagonist. So it's not just, this NPC is waiting for you. They're always in their house whenever you want them to be there. Because they talk about interacting with each other, and they seem to grow, and they get through things, and they don't get better. Everyone still has their own trauma, but they become more, for me, they became more real in that sense. They weren't just always the same one-dimensional character I initially meet.
One that we were just talking about before this panel that I think we should bring up also is Celeste, which is phenomenal representation, and also through game design too, that this mountain is literally a metaphor for the anxiety, and that she's able to overcome that through the game. And like you said with Hellblade, you are this person, and you feel the struggle, and you feel like not othering the character, but like we are going to get through this together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this is maybe a little bit repetitive, so we could skip it if you want to, but what is your favorite or most meaningful or impactful game with constructive mental health representation? Was there one that maybe was the first one you experienced and you went wow, I resonate with this, I connect with this, I feel heard in a way that maybe I hadn't before?
Ooh. I think the one that maybe surprised me the most, there's a game called Elude, and it's this little, I think it's Flash, but it's web-based, and it was made by Doris Rush and her team. And you're just this guy, and you're hopping from tree branch to tree branch, you're singing the little birds, and then eventually you fall off the tree branch. It happened for me very quickly because I'm a terrible platformer. I will totally own up to that. And then you start to sink. Like the ground literally pulls you underneath it, and you can struggle and fight your way back up, and then you can go back to jumping and singing. But over time, you eventually end up being sucked into the ground. And I remember the feeling of helplessness and panic turned into helplessness when I realized that I was being sucked down for the last time. So I'm not sure I like the message, the end message of, well, you're just gonna die. So that might not be the most hopeful, but that was definitely a game that hit me very viscerally, and something that was really surprised me because it's only 3 minutes, 5 minutes long. So it's this tiny, compact powerhouse about what depression can feel like and what it can look like, and to give you just just that glimpse of what it might be to manage that kind of issue.
For me, it was Fragments of Him. It's a game, it's a visual novel where you are reliving the life of someone who dies in a car accident, but he was getting ready to kind of come out to his family. He was working through introducing his male fiance, and you learn about his life, and then you kind of get to glimpse the person he left behind. And it was a short visual novel, maybe 10 to 12 hours till playtime, depending on what you do, but you get to walk through his shoes and that of his family and everything else, and it was at that time it impacted me because it made me think of what you can leave behind and the footprints and the ways in which you impact people may not even realize it, because you got to see the things that he never got to see through relatives' eyes, through his fiance's eyes, and it was one of those games that really just got to me. And then surprisingly enough, The Witcher 3. No, I mean, don't laugh. It's a long game. I feel like I'm never going to ever finish the last DLC. But there's a mission in there, and again, trigger warning because it deals with domestic violence and miscarriage. I actually cried playing this mission because the bloody baron you meet, and you can't opt out of the mission because it's kind of critical to find out information of a character you need to find later. But you find out that this character has beat his wife to the point where she miscarried, and all the things happening to him are because of the spirit of the child that he caused, to pass away, and he has to suffer the consequences of what he's done. And for various reasons, that really affected me emotionally. And, I'm pretty sure they weren't trying to tell this deep emotional story in this moment. Maybe they were, but it really was a gut punch to me when I played that mission the first time, because I wasn't expecting that kind of emotional depth.
Yeah. I think for me, I mentioned Night in the Woods, but I think that was one that really got to me. I related so much to May. And it was funny, it was after I'd written my novel, but my novel's a lot about coping with change and the progression from high school to college. And that was when I discovered my autism, because suddenly I was in a world that was not the world that I was familiar with, and I came up across things that I had never encountered before, and I didn't know how to cope. And I really resonated with May. As she's leaving college, she's coming home, and she expects the world to be the same as how she left it, and it isn't. And that they don't really, I don't feel like they slam that down your throat. They just put her in that environment, and you just really feel that. Mm-hmm. They show, don't tell really, really well. And so I keep coming back to that game. I keep playing it over and over again, because I really connected with that. So for game devs in the room, what is something that they should consider when including mental health representation? We've talked about a couple things that you want to do, but what are some other things to keep in mind?
Content warnings. It may seem like a very small thing, and you may worry that it's going to ruin the surprise or whatever you've got in store. But if mental health is a surprise, then it shouldn't be. So that's just a small, something just at the very beginning, just hey, this deals with issues related to X, Y, and Z. Here's a hotline number. That can do so much. As an example, I was at Games for Change last year, and there was a VR experience. And I just kind of got pulled into it. I didn't know what I was going to go into. I'm like, sure, whatever, I'll do VR. And in the opening scene, there is a domestic violence issue where you are a child and you're watching your parents fight. And I was like, whoa, this is not okay. I was not warned that this was going to be a thing that happens. You're a very small child, and I have a very small child. And so for me, that was something that was really overwhelming, and I would have taken the headset off and just walked away, but you're in a public place, and so the social demands of the situation are oh, I don't really feel comfortable leaving. So yes, please, content warnings. They're very, very important.
And give players a chance, I think, to opt out of something, because you don't know anyone's experience when you are programming a game or what's happening. Because the last two Assassin's Creed games have child death in them. And, I've got a lot of friends with kids, and I stream, and I warn them, I'm like, you may not want to watch this part of the game. And then there was another part that surprised me out of the blue. I don't have children. I have no interest in having children. But that still was kind of a slap in the face to have this happen, because you get so attached to this child in the course of the game. So things like warnings, but also give me a chance to kind of either opt out, fade to black, or something like that, because I was not ready to deal with this scene at all. And if I could have said, okay, I'm just going to fade to black and I'm going to put the controller down, I would have been much better about that scene.
Well, and I think games are such a creative medium that you can do that in creative ways that actually can benefit the design of the game. Allowing for those options can actually probably branch into a way that allows a unique gameplay experience. So it doesn't have to limit you.
One of the things that really grinds my gears is that oftentimes devs think that you have to traumatize people in order to get them to feel empathy. I can speak as a psychologist trained in clinical psychology. There is no requirement for trauma to feel empathy. So if you're oh, I'm going to traumatize this person so they'll know what it's like to feel traumatized, no. That is unethical. That is not good game design. If you want good game design, look at something like What Remains of Edith Finch. That is a game that is all about death positivity, and that's another one where the idea of being able to skip, because I hope I'm not spoiling anything, there's a scene in What Remains of Edith Finch where you are an active, passive, complicit participant in the death of a child. And this entire game you're playing through, and every character you play as, so let me take a step back. Edith Finch is a story of kind of like a walking simulator where you're going through this old house of the Finch family, and you play as each character, and each character has this kind of tragic death that occurs. And most of the time, it fades to black. It's very artistic in that way. And so by the time you get to the kids' room, you know that every character you play as is going to die. And I just remember coming through this cubbyhole and looking into a room and seeing a crib and going, oh God, please don't make me do this. And then there you are playing as a little kid, and the bathtub is filling up, and mom's distracted, and you have to throw the rubber ducky to advance the game. The rubber ducky is the one that tips the faucet that keeps it going, And I remember just like handing the controller to my husband saying, I can't do this. Like, I want to play this game. I physically cannot do this. And so I had to walk away. So yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to bring up the fish cutting scene. For anyone that's played that game, you know what I'm talking about. That was one where my husband and I went, oh gosh, and like we couldn't play because, like you say, it sets up a pattern, and so you know what's coming, and it's so compelling because you don't want to enact anything that's going to allow that. But I think you calling it death positivity, I think, is a really interesting way of labeling. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's true because it acknowledges that there's a cycle of life and a cycle of death, and kind of coping with that. And it's on a positive note at the end, I think, even though there's all this sad.
Oh yeah,
it's tragedy, like, and I think when you're saying about the explicitness and the sensationalism, it does such a good job of the show don't tell, where it's so much more compelling because it's not showing it in such a graphic, over-the-top way. You're connecting with the experience.
Yeah, in a more abstract manner. It makes it more approachable.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so all the more I think the shock value deters the compellingness of an experience. The more subtle you make it, the much more compelling it is. Yeah. What do you think you'd like to see in the future for mental health representation in games?
I would like to see people and characters have mental health as just a matter of course of their character, and not have it be the be-all, end-all. If a character needs meds or something like that, just like everyday life, like those of us take medication, it's not a big deal. It's not like, oh, woe is me, I have to take meds every day to regulate my brain, therefore I'm a garbage human, that a lot of us fall into. That's not the case. Just not have it be the be-all, end-all of their character and why they either are evil, kind of morally gray, just this is something that is part of me, and move on with it.
Yeah, it's like someone wearing glasses. Like, my eyes do not function correctly. I had this wonderful technology that allows me to actually see all your beautiful faces. Nobody judges me for it, well, at least not anybody older than like a fourth grader judges me for wearing glasses. And you know, taking your medication, seeing a therapist is the same. It's very much the same thing. I think I have a whole list. I have a litany of things that I would like to see changed. But I really want, so I guess stepping away from characters, I want to see mental health addressed in different ways in games. Because right now, you have characters and they like have it or they don't. So it's like some more morally gray, like Tanya was saying, I'd love to see some of that. I would love for there never to be another horror game that uses an asylum, ever. Like, I'm so tired. Like, we see asylums as, or mental health institutions or psychiatric hospitals, is a shorthand that we use in media for be afraid, be very afraid, bad things are gonna happen. Has anybody ever played a video game where your player woke up in an insane asylum and something good happened to you immediately after?
Right?
No. No. And so, yeah, the trope is dead, kill it. Okay, so board games, different topic. We can talk. It's a whole other beast.
Board games are the hope for the world. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I would love to never see another insane asylum in a horror game that is just there to tell you to be afraid. I would also love to see the way that we kind of commodify mental health to maybe shift a little bit, like sanity meters. The idea that your mental health is a dipstick that you can just measure, like, oh, nope, not quite insane yet. And there's like, don't get me wrong, I love Don't Starve. There's a lot of really amazing games that have sanity meters, but I would like to have more conversations and thoughtfulness behind the commodification of mental health, mental wellness, and mental illness in games beyond just characters.
Yeah, I think you guys said a lot of really great things. I think for me, just more and more of it so we can have more ranges of experiences represented.
Oh, absolutely. I remember, so has everybody here played Depression Quest or know of Depression Quest? Okay, I don't like Depression Quest. I say that in like with the most respect possible. The thing that I don't like about it is that it is considered the depression game. Right. Like, you want a game about depression? There is Depression Quest. Go play that. And if you play through Depression Quest, it's a very cognitive-oriented kind of depression, like, which makes sense for it's a Twine game. Of course, it's more like process and thinky-oriented. That's not going to be everybody's experience with depression at all. But because there's only one of them, so if your experience with depression doesn't match the Depression Quest, I have seen people go, well, maybe I don't have depression. And I'm like, no, honey, no. Let's go sign you up right now. I'll help you find somebody with a sliding scale. Like, well, let's go. So I think that is one thing that needs to to piggyback back off of what you're saying is that we need more.
Right.
Like the token depression game is not enough. The token anxiety game is not enough. The same way that a token character that is a different skin color or gender identity is not enough.
Well, and this is with all media. I mean, this is a huge conversation in the creative writing world. We need diverse books movement, and there's so many token books, like you said, like this is the book on depression, this is the book on autism, and it's a shame because when I look through the Goodreads reviews of a book, they're like, well, this isn't my experience, so boo. And it's like, I feel so bad for those authors that are so brave enough to go out there and be like, this is the first YA with a hijab narrator, protagonist, and then people are like, well, that's not my experience. It's like, well, we need more so we can have a range of so many other experiences, and it's so brave to go out there and put that out there. But we don't want, like you say, this to be the book that says it all about mental health or any sort of representation.
I saw people complain about Hellblade that that's not what their psychotic or psychosis was like. And I'm like, okay, that's totally valid. Like, it might not be. But then the next step is, well, this is not a good representation of psychosis then. I'm like, it's not your representation. But that's why we need more of these kinds of games. And speaking of needing diverse games.
Hi.
I feel like it's a perfect segue right there.
Oh, well, I kind of forgot this in my intro, but I run a nonprofit. I was trying to stick to mental health stuff. I run a nonprofit based in Chicago called I Need Diverse Games. So if you've ever seen that on Twitter or anywhere else, that is me. I started it. And ironically today, a friend of mine over at Video Games 24/7 had an article about games and mechanics and diversity. And oh, poor Kirk, his mentions. But I'm actually doing a panel tomorrow at 2:30 about Beyond the Diversity 101 conversation. And a lot of times people don't think about mental health as part of the diversity conversation for whatever reason. Like any kind of diversity that is not the cis, straight, hetero, white dude, that is diversity. Because, like I am black, I'm queer, I'm cisgender female, I have mental health issues. And people it's like they kind of go, well, it's only about people of color, it's only about having that one redheaded white chick. And that's, look, we're diverse.
Redheaded white chick. Woo!
Look, we're diverse. We hit our quotient. We have no men on this panel. But no, a lot of people don't think about this as a diversity issue. That's actually not the case. There's a lot of people advocating for mental health in games. Take this as an AFK room. Again, there are people that care about this issue, not just in streaming, but in games. And for those of you that are playing games, you find something that doesn't quite gel with you, reach out to developers. Don't yell at them on Twitter. A, that's not effective at all. And B, that's the fastest way to get blocked and not listened to. Especially by me, because if you start yelling at me on Twitter, I'm just going to block you and go about my day.
I'll block you too, if you yell at her.
Yeah. Yay. But we have so many ways to reach out to developers, either a forum, if you do find a way to contact them, go, hey, I played your game, I see it, this is how you represented this, or maybe you didn't intend it this way. And there's a way to open a dialogue. And I'm not saying be super sweet and saccharine. Be honest, but there's a way to do that without being an asshole. End of story. Because a lot of times people yell and scream on the internet, and it's not effective at all. It's super ineffective. There's a way to reach out and do that. And if you make games, think about this as you're making your game. Ask someone to do diversity consulting and pay them if you can, because it is a skill, it is time, it is labor. So think about this in addition to all those things you're putting in your game, like mechanics, like story, like characters, and realize that mental health does not look like one particular person. Having a mental health issue does not look or sound like one particular thing.
Yep.
Thank you for the segue.
It's smooth.
So before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to make sure to give some space if there were any other things you guys wanted to bring up or discuss that we hadn't covered yet.
As we're sitting here, none of us brought up We Happy Few.
I am currently playing through it, so no spoilers.
Oh, I haven't played it yet.
Okay.
It kind of just creeps me out, the very idea of literal happy pills and pretending the world does not exist as it is.
So my reason for playing this game is for my job. Like, I literally got to expense buying this game for my job. Because I'm like, oh, it's a game where, exactly like you said, medication, mental health, what's going on. So I'm about halfway through, and hopefully we'll write something up about it. But yes, I feel like that's a good like AAA mainstream title that is addressing these issues in a way, so far as I have found, in a way that is not terrible and possibly good, but I haven't gotten to the end yet, so I don't know. The other thing I want to give a shout out is to Skyrim. God, I love Skyrim. And there is a huge amount of mental health in Skyrim. So, for example, there's Shigarath, who is the god of madness, and he lives on the Isles of Dementia and Mania, which I thought was really cool. There's also a quest where you go in and you have to save, oh God, what's his name? Some old guy. Go into his memories and like vanquish his inner demons. And I have his name. I'm gonna kick myself.
Oh, is that the one that sends you on the quest for one of the Elder Scrolls, and he's living like an ice thing?
That's a different one.
Okay.
But there are many. The other thing that I really like about it is that in the Elder Scrolls universe, the Khajiit, which are like the cat-like people, they are discriminated against because they're seen as dirty thieves because they consume skooma, which is like a booze or an alcohol or some kind of opioid. And it was just really, really cool for me to play through with that kind of lens. I'm like, oh, this game is actually portraying like stigma against people with mental health issues, and not in like a bad boo way, but like letting you experience. If you play as a Khajiit, people will not sell things to you. People will not help you because you're one of those dirty cat people, which is like the worst thing they could call you. And there's a million examples like that in Skyrim, and so I just want to give a shout out to them for exploring that. For a game that's as old as it is, going in and exploring those kinds of topics in a way that are not terrible.
Well, naturally embedded.
Yeah.
It's not like this is going to be a lecture about this topic.
Yes.
It's just, this is, and I think that was something that we brought up earlier, and I think Life is Strange does that so well too, about just kind of casually, like you can go into your friend's medicine cabinet and she's got some antidepressant pills and, nothing said about it. It's just like, these are here. Cool. Let's move on. It's just kind of like part of life.
Yeah, it's the idea that you don't have to make a mental health game to make a game that advances mental health.
Well said.
So if you don't want to make a game that is like, this is a mental health game, that's totally fine. Just make one that's not making things worse, I guess is a good way of putting it there.
Yeah. And regarding We Happy Few, I've only watched playthroughs of the beginning, so I feel a little uncomfortable speaking of it, but the premise is intriguing to me.
I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. Next time.
Yeah. Next MAGFest, when I actually have time to finish it, I will report back.
So should we open up to questions?
Yes, and
Do
can I
people
make
have
one
questions?
request?
I guess.
When you ask a question, have a question.
Yes.
Not a comment, not your backstory. This is a safe environment. I'm sorry. I don't know. Do we have any tech people in the room who can ask for an extra mic? Or,
Here, just take mine.
all right.
Okay.
Or
So
we
we'll
could have
repeat
people
the
come up.
question.
You just wanna-
We can repeat the question.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we'll start.
To the person who was playing Inquisition, how did you feel about their? It felt like they were trying to represent different kinds of people in Bull's Chargers in the first place. How did you feel about it?
So the question is, how did I feel about the different kinds of representation in Bull's Chargers, which is the mercenary group that the Iron Bull has? Do you mean in terms of mental health?
It felt like all the way certain people, like one person, she insisted that she was not a witch.
Oh, I see what you mean. I actually was not thinking about it in that sense. I thought the Bulls Chargers were all interesting people. I was interested in the most in the guy that doesn't talk. I forgot his name, the character name, but I did not think that was an intentional nod at representing different people. It's just, this is a ragtag group of people. Bull is brought together through circumstance, and there's mercenary family.
Yeah.
I'm hopefully it's me. I'm just curious if any of you have played To the Moon.
Oh.
The question.
I asked you to play it like
Yeah.
2 years ago. I gave you an assignment.
Yes, and I did the assignment.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question was, have any of us played To the Moon, and what do we feel about it? I will abstain as I have not played it.
I've read about it, which is not the same thing as playing it, so I will also.
I mean, I cried, so it's a compelling story. In regards to mental health, and I think that's even where our conversation was initially on it, I'm not fully sure how I feel about the representation for mental health. I think the narrative itself is compelling, but I feel like I have to think a little bit more about the mental health. I like that it's not, like we said, it's not like overemphasized. It's not, in a sense, it's kind of what the game revolves around because you're collecting these memories, but I think it was done in a sensitive way. So I will say that.
Yeah, right front row.
And you guys were talking about heroic mental health earlier. In the Alice the Madness series, if you guys played it, do you feel that represented it in a positive or even acceptable fashion?
I haven't played Alice. Have you guys?
I have not played Alice. And the question was, in talking about positive or heroic mental health, have any of us played Alice Madness series? It's installed on my PS4. I have yet to actually play it.
From what I've heard, so this is secondhand, I've heard that there's a much more positive, there's mixed feelings, obviously, but that the first one was a little bit more careful than perhaps the second one in representation.
The second one had a pretty shocking reveal. I think people might not have been okay with.
Yeah, it was one that was kind of described a little bit more on the border. Some things well done, some things less sensitive.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions on games about like addiction as a mental illness?
What component? Like as treatment, as intervention, as awareness, as...
More so awareness, because it's becoming a new thing that addiction is a mental illness, and previously it has been seen as not as much of a mental illness.
The one that's popping into my head is Papa and Yo by Minority Media. That one is, I don't want to say too much, but that is definitely one that would be around that. Alcohol. It's tough because a lot of times drinking in games is like celebrated, so it's hard to think of one where.
Or it's like one extreme or the other. It's not complexified at all. It's just like super bad, super good.
But yeah, Papa and Yo would be a really good place to start. Yeah.
Hi, actually kind of piggybacking off of that, I was just thinking about the game Lisa, which is like dark and like very traumatizing in a lot of ways, but I did appreciate how realistic it felt, the like addiction aspect of Lisa, because you're basically taking like the pills called joy that like make you like stronger, but are like ruining your body, and it's it definitely, like, even if it's not the most like positive, and it's like a very like triggering portrayal of like a lot of issues, domestic violence and stuff like that, definitely like the feelings associated with it. Like, have you guys?
It's on my list.
I haven't played it.
Yeah.
Never played it.
So come back next year and we'll have an answer for you, because obviously we do our homework.
It's been on my list.
Okay. Would it be helpful if people came up to the microphone? Okay. Just watch out for the camera. Don't want anybody to die. Yeah.
And also, please actually have a question.
That can't be overemphasized. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I had a question about content warnings. And
Okay.
If the best way to implement them, if there's any good examples, and if there's any merit to withholding them because subverting expectations can be more impactful. Or should we just have content warnings from everything?
I think it depends on the theme of the game, because for me, if there had been a content warning, and not spoiling the plot, but this game deals with issues of child death. You know, that simple warning, because it's not telling me when it happens, but, you know, for someone who maybe has lost a child, that could be a very sensitive topic without knowing that, and that means they can no longer play this game, or maybe they're going to be hit with feelings when they get to that section. I think a general content warning at the beginning of the game, and maybe every time you load it, as a reminder, because like I've put in 120 hours into Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I may have forgotten that content warning by the next time I go in. And I think a general one versus a very specific warning is good.
Yeah, you don't have to ruin the surprise of your game. But again, I want to emphasize that you don't need to shock or traumatize people to get them to identify with whatever you're trying to get at.
Prioritize the design of the game and doing those craft skills well over feeling like you need to have shock value.
Yeah, because keep in mind that when people are in a state of shock, they are not going to pick up what you're laying down. So if the purpose is to shock for the sake of shock, then that's one thing. If the purpose is to have this twist because it is emotionally wrenching, like that, those kinds of decisions are going to matter in your design. Because if you think, oh, well, if I, here's the twist, here's the M. Night Shyamalan twist, that's one thing, because that's in line with the story. But if it's like, surprise, mental health, that might not be great. And then absolutely agree, it can be broad. Like, hey, this game deals with, death or suicidality, or like just really broad strokes like that, I think are important to have.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I was just thinking about, I've had a history of really bad ADHD, and I've never really seen that in any media. I wanted to know if you guys know any media that has a character with really bad ADHD, like that links to other mental health problems that they would have that with that. And if not, do you think that would be possible to portray well?
So I think you have seen ADHD represented in media, but probably not in the way that you want to see it. Think of like any kind of manic pixie dream girl kind of trope, where you're just like flitting from one thing to the next, and like, ooh, shiny object, squirrel. Those, like Doug, I think, from Up, who is adorable and I love, but he's got a little doggy ADHD going on. So I think those examples are out there in terms of like a game that portrays it in a way where the person who is managing ADHD has anything more than just being, like, they are more than their symptom. They have some kind of arc and growth. I can't think of any, but I absolutely think that you could design one. Go to a game jam, make a game, let me know how it is, because I would love to see what you come up with.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Hi there. So my quick question was, you talked a lot about how while there's very poor representation of mental health and it may not be handled properly in games, your ultimate conclusion seemed to be, correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed to be that developers need to find a way to change their game. You had talked about putting in a content warning or trigger warning. I'm okay with that. But you had talked about, Tanya had talked about putting the option to completely skip segments of the game. Personally, I can't agree with that, because as a person is creating a game, they're ultimately dismissing a piece of their artwork. So my question is, where is the consumer responsibility in all of this? Instead of telling developers, you must change your game in this way in order to accommodate this, isn't it at all possible for the consumer to just understand that not every game is for every type of player?
Well, first off, I didn't say they need to change their game. They should consider this. And having the option for me to skip something that could be traumatizing to me is not denying art. It is giving me the option. I can say, yes, I'll play through this scene, or I can fade to black. So many games give us options. It's not saying deny art. The scene is there. I, as the consumer, can make that choice to play that scene or not. So asking for consideration for me, for someone, if they want me to spend $60, $70, up to $200 on a game, that is me supporting their art and not denying it. So as a game developer, because the onus should not be on me, I'm not telling any developer what to do. I'm asking for the consideration, especially for those people that want to keep the argument going about are games art or not. If you're going to have this representation, if you're going to put this content in the game, give me, as the player, path A, I can play this out, I can choose this, or path B, if this is upsetting, I don't maybe want to see the scene where a child is going to die. So it's not denying art, it's not telling developers what to do. And I'm sorry if I'm getting really angry, but that is something I always get on Twitter with people. Well, you're telling people what to do in their game. I'm not. I'm asking for consideration as a consumer who is being asked for my hard-earned money.
Sure, and I understand that maybe I misunderstood what your point was, so thank you for correcting me. But my question does still stand. Where is the consumer responsibility in determining which games to purchase, which games to keep playing through, or what?
That all depends on you. That is a subjective question that no one can really answer. There are games that people love and rave about, I got Spider-Man, I got it, I got Red Dead Redemption, I was bored, I gave my friend a copy, even though I got it for free, and I was like, here, enjoy it. But everyone talks about Red Dead Redemption like it's the second coming of video games. So...
So one thing is that games already do this a lot, but not necessarily for content. So there are, not always, but colorblind options, because we realize that some dudes can't see different colors, and it's important for them to be able to enjoy the game. That is definitely changing the aesthetic of the game, but we do it because we know it's important to people. Levels difficulty settings, like there are some people, adaptability controllers for people who don't have the full fine motor skills or can't use a traditional controller. We have all these affordances that we make so that the most people can enjoy the most games possible. So I don't think anybody here is saying developers must do this. I mean, it'd be great if we could just have these things in mind when we're designing. I mean, how many games have cutscenes that you can skip? Like, that is literally skipping past content that the creators created. So I feel like this is a very similar conversation that happened, oh God, was it like 15 years ago now with BioWare about wanting a Mass Effect where you just played the story and you avoided all the action and all the pre-Gamergate stuff that blew up over that. So I guess what we're saying is that we already make accessibility things available. We need to broaden our idea of what accessible means and encourage developers to consider them, and then hopefully reward them with our dollars and our hours in their game.
And I think also on that note, the idea of having the sensitivity warnings beforehand or in the description on Steam, then that allows a consumer to make choices that are appropriate for them. If it's like, well, I know that this is something that I struggle with, then maybe seeing that will help me as a consumer decide what games are most appropriate for me.
Yeah.
Thank you for your clarification.
Sure.
So this is parts for your consideration and part of question. Have any of you ever played the game Darkest Dungeon?
I have, and I uninstalled it after 20 minutes.
Wow. I bring this up because of the mechanic called the stress mechanic, where as you go through, it's a very difficult game, a different one for medieval game. But as you play through, your characters, if they survive, will accumulate stress. When you hit 100 stress, you either get a virtue, you become courageous, let's go through this, or you get an affliction, like you become sadistic, or I won't listen to you in combat, things like that. And because it's a medieval style game, you can treat these afflictions by getting a doctor to inject you with the good drugs, flagellating yourself in a church, going whoring, stuff like that. My question about that is how do you feel about more antiquated responses to mental health and mental health afflictions and things like that in video games?
So I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier when we talked about Town of Light and why that game is so difficult, at least for me, to kind of like conceptualize, because it is putting forth the idea of a mental institution as a place where horrible things happen, which it does not reflect current mental health, but it is, I mean, it's based on historical documents about what went on in this actual location. So I think there is a very fine line to walk between, we need to make it accurate, historically accurate. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the argument, well, my Arthurian, you know, Excalibur game can only have white people because they're the only ones who existed then. So, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying. So that there is a line to walk between being like accurate and being, you know, engaging in a game and in play. So I think that it's really, really challenging, and my rambling, I hope, will end with the smart thing of saying that, is there a reason for it? Like, what is the purpose? Are you putting in mental health for poops and giggles? Or does it actually serve a purpose? Is it because of shock value? Like, why is it there? And if in the game it's there for a reason, and it has like substantive, like if you removed it from the game, would the game still continue? And if yes, then do you really need it? So I can't make recommendations about what to do or what not to do, but I think a really important first step is having that conversation, and even just thinking about, okay, so we're putting this in this game in this way to represent this mental health issue. Do we need it? And if we need it, why?
Justifying everything. I mean, that's any good craft, is kill your darlings and make sure everything you're doing is purposeful and meaningful.
Yeah, Coco Chanel. Yeah. Put on all your jewelry and then take something off.
Yeah. And I think we're getting close to the end of time, so we'll
Speed
do our
round.
best to get everyone that's already up there. Yeah.
Speed round.
I was wondering, you guys mentioned, I forget what word you used, sorry, but something about sort of letting people choose their own path in games as opposed to sort of, you know, them ending up somewhere and not liking it. And in Darkest Dungeon, there's actually seems a lot of stuff of you managing the crew and the characters dying or going insane with the whole insane runner thing. So I was wondering, it has autosave in it, so you can't go back into decisions. So I was wondering, that fact that you can't return to your previous decisions, is that something that you feel is a form of sort of violating that, of not letting people choose their path?
No, that's not. I feel safe in saying that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a game, because most games will tell you, hey, there's an autosave, FYI. And if you can spend however long it takes to make that splash screen, you can spend the same amount of time to go me, hey, you know what, kids die in this game, just FYI, so you know. I feel safe in saying that's not on the same level what we were talking about.
I think it may depend on the content. Like, I feel like games like Life is Strange, that's very integral to how they're talking about mental health.
But you can also rewind or reload a save.
Yeah, in Life is Strange, that might be a
yeah. That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, in most games, even with an autosave, you can still have a manual save to go back to. You may lose some progress, but most games do tell you, hey, there's an autosave function.
Yeah.
Let's concur.
I've also played Darkest Dungeon, but that has nothing to do with my question.
Okay.
Okay, so it's somewhat related to what you were saying before about villains who are motivated by their problems and stuff, and it's related to that a bit. It's where people with anxieties or mental health issues have them explained by supernatural forces of some sort. And I've seen stories that do that very deliberately, but also somewhat by accident. And I think my question is, for example, like, at what point does it become a problem, basically? Like, if there's that kind of thing is responsible for mental health problems.
So just to clarify your question, is at what point does a representation of mental health become problematic?
No, at one point does having mental health be, having some, like, some sort of force be responsible for mental health problems, sort of. Like, some people have depression because of this magic thing, or all people have it.
So like in Skyrim, you can be touched by Shigarath, which means that you're slowly going insane. And like, so you're asking, can that be problematic? Is if you're explaining away mental health issues as like a supernatural force or like a magical, I really hate the idea of mental illness as like a token of poof, you have it, and now poof, you don't.
Yeah.
That for me is problematic, but I'm not going to say that games shouldn't do it, because there's just way too many games out there that do it in totally different ways. Again, it's such a morally gray area that asking devs to be cognizant of that, like if you're being punished by, I think it's Betrayal at House on the Hill, if you get punished by going insane, like that to me is problematic, where the mental illness is a punishment.
Yeah.
Like there's inherent wrongness and badness associated with it, as opposed to this is something somebody's dealing with. Right. Whereas if you are gifted by a god and you now have neuroses and you're managing that neuroses on your journey, that to me is not as problematic. I don't know if that answers the question. Hopefully.
Yeah, and I think when there's the question of like how far is too far, like that's tricky and problematic in and of itself. I think if you have to ask the question, it gets a little murky. So,
but thank you for your question.
How would you like to see clinical and mental health professionals get more involved in the gaming community, and what would that look like?
They need to show the F up. Do I have any other mental health people in here? Woo! All right, you are now my favorites. I will be very quick because I know we're short on time.
Yeah.
Clinicians in general need to get over the idea that video games are making our children into murderers and getting them addicted and blah, 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 all the stuff that the research does not support at all. That's a whole different talk that I will rant on. They need to show up. 97% of teenagers play video games. Over 2 billion people worldwide play video games. If you are a clinician and you are seeing clients, there's a 1 in 2 chance that the person sitting across from you plays video games. That does not mean that video games are important enough for them to bring into therapy, but for a large amount of your clients, video games are how they are managing whatever they're going through. Like, if someone is playing excessive video games, it's probably because they've got some other shit going on in their lives, and this is how they're coping. So, for clinicians, it is, to me, a moral and ethical imperative that we get our stuff together. We understand that being culturally competent is important. If a client comes in and they are, say, Buddhist, and you do not know anything about Buddhism, it is ethically unresponsible for you to treat that person if Buddhism is important to them. You either learn or you refer them out. To me, it's the same thing with video games. If a client comes in and video games are an important part of their life, you are obligated as a clinician to either understand that game and the culture that surrounds it, or refer them to somebody who does. Sorry, I get really upset. So really passionate about that.
So we're at the end of our time formally, but some of us will be able to stay after for the additional questions, so please come up and talk to us, and any of you that might have any additional
Thank
questions.
you all so much
Thank
for
you.
coming.